Have you ever walked into a room and felt something was already said about you before you arrived? You can feel it, not in words, but in silence that's too loud. That's gossip, and no, it is not harmless. It is not small talk. It is the revenge of the weak, the currency of the jealous, and the weapon of those who cannot build, so they try to tear down. Gossip is not about truth, it's about projection. And more often than not, it is the strategy of those who have failed, not just in action, but in ambition, in character, in spirit. Those who cannot rise will always seek to pull others down to the ground. It's not because they hate you, it's because you remind them of everything they chose not to become. You remind them of the roads they were too afraid to take, the discipline they abandoned, the self-respect they compromised, and the life they never dared to build. And so, in the quiet corners behind backs, they begin to whisper, not with facts, but with fragments, not with strength, but with shadow, because gossip is not about someone else's truth. It's a scream for attention from someone living in their own silence. Failure doesn't always come from lack of opportunity. Sometimes it comes from a lack of will, and when the will dies, the ego starts to rot. That rot shows itself in passive attacks, the kind that never confront you, never challenge you face to face. They lurk behind fake smiles, behind just sharing and only saying, but in truth, they are just revealing their own brokenness. The person who gossips about you is not trying to inform others. They are trying to protect their own ego by dismantling your presence. Because your existence threatens their illusion of control. And here's the brutal truth. No one gossips about someone beneath them. Gossip travels upwards. It always aims at what it fears. It is a kind of fear disguised as criticism. When someone talks behind your back, it means you are ahead. And because they lack the courage to confront their own inadequacies, they instead focus on yours, even if they have to invent them. Because to face your success would mean they have to face their failure. And failure to them is unacceptable, so they create narratives to cope with it. Narratives where you're lucky, fake, dishonest, arrogant. Anything that removes responsibility from their own inaction. Understand this. Gossip is not about the person being talked about. It's a mirror for the one speaking. It shows who they are when no one's watching. It reveals a mind that has time for opinions, but no discipline for self-work. It reveals a life so hollow that someone else's name fills its emptiness. They talk about you because they have nothing inside themselves worth discussing. They focus on you because you are moving, and movement offends the stagnant. The most dangerous thing you can do to a gossip is succeed more, because your growth is their greatest threat, and that is why when you rise, the noise rises too. When you evolve, their whispers become louder. Not because you're wrong, but because you've become undeniable. You've become the proof that it was never about circumstances, it was always about character, and character, unlike gossip, takes work. Gossipers don't want to work. They want to explain away your success, so they can stay comfortable in their failure. They will say you've changed. Yes, you have, because you're supposed to. Evolution is the duty of those who have a vision. The ones who cannot evolve talk. The ones who can act. The ones who build don't have time to tear others down. And if you're busy tearing someone down, it's because you've stopped building yourself. Gossip is not just a waste of energy, it's a betrayal of potential. Every second spent talking about someone else's life is a second stolen from improving your own. You want power, build. You want respect, create. You want revenge, succeed. Because the people who try to bury you with their words don't understand that you were a seed. The more they throw dirt, the deeper your roots grow. Let them talk. Let them drown in their echo chamber of insecurity. You, on the other hand, must learn the ancient truth. Never respond with the same tools they use. You are not here to trade words. You are here to trade effort, silence, and undeniable proof. Let them write paragraphs of lies. You write a legacy of results. And now, let's talk about the minds that fuel this machinery of gossip. At its core, gossip is not born from power, but from powerlessness. It is a technique of control used by those who cannot lead, cannot inspire, and cannot confront. So instead, they sabotage. They manipulate through suggestion, rumor, and doubt. It's subtle warfare, not direct battle. They don't want to win. They want no one else to win. And so, the battlefield becomes social, infecting the minds of others, building quiet armies through implication, not truth. But what they forget is that true strength doesn't whisper, it roars through excellence. Insecure people think attention equals influence, but attention fades. Influence is built in silence, and while they are talking, you are moving. While they are mocking, you are planning. And while they are reacting, you are building structures they will one day try to enter. But by then, the doors will be too high for them to reach, and they will have only their bitterness to keep them company. What they don't realize is that gossip never destroys its target. It destroys its source, because people eventually see through the noise. They sense where the venom is coming from. And when they do, trust disappears, credibility evaporates, and the gossipers are left isolated, stuck in a room of mirrors talking to themselves. So next time you hear your name in a mouth that never fed you, know this: you are being envied, not evaluated. They are not seeking truth. They are seeking control. But control over what? Over the narrative, over perception, over the illusion that they matter more than they do, because deep down they feel forgotten. Gossip is their last desperate attempt to matter. Don't let them pull you into their game. Stay above, stay focused, stay dangerous. In your silence, in your results, in your discipline. And in the end, let them say what they will. Because in the war between effort and ego, ego always loses. Let your life be so loud that their gossip becomes a whisper lost in the storm of your success. They don't attack you directly, not because they're noble, but because they lack the courage. They do it through gossip, because gossip is the strategy of those who have no influence, no real power, and no conviction to stand behind what they say. The same people who smile in your face but whisper in your absence are not just cowards, they are powerless. They don't speak truth to your face because they fear confrontation, and even more than that, they fear being exposed. So they choose the safest form of attack, behind your back, with diluted words, wrapped in jokes, sarcasm, and concern. It's not bravery, it's survival instinct. Gossip is their shield from their own inability to assert themselves in a world where results speak louder than rumors. When someone lacks authority in their own life, they will seek to exert control over others through narrative. That's what gossip is, a fabricated narrative born from personal insecurity. It's an attempt to construct a version of reality where they have influence, because when someone can't lead with actions, they attempt to lead with influence over perception. This is why the powerless gossip more than the powerful, because power does not need justification. It stands on its own. The powerless, on the other hand, need to explain away their irrelevance, and nothing does that better than tearing someone else's name down to their level. People who have no say in the direction of their own lives often turn to the illusion of control by commenting on the lives of others. This is not just a behavioral tendency, it's a deeply embedded psychological defense mechanism. When they feel invisible in their own world, they try to become visible in yours, and they do it by hijacking your image, your name, your identity. In the absence of personal achievement, the only way they feel powerful is by manipulating the perceptions of others. They lack inner substance, so they rely on outer distortion. That's the real reason they talk. It's not about what you did or didn't do, it's about the space you occupy that they never dared to reach. Look closely at who spends their time gossiping the most, and you'll find a pattern. They are never the builders, never the creators, never the ones grinding in silence. No, the gossipers sit in the spectator seats, throwing comments like stones at the ones running on the field. Because action demands accountability, and they fear accountability. Gossip gives them the illusion of movement while standing still. It lets them feel involved, relevant, important, without ever having to risk, try, or fail. They stay in their comfort zone and use gossip as their voice, because it's easier to talk about someone who is moving than to start moving yourself. This behavior is rooted in fear of exposure, of comparison, of failure. To act directly means to step into the light, where flaws are visible. To gossip is to hide in the shadows, where you can point fingers without being seen. That's why those without courage lean on this weapon. They can't stand up to you, so they hope to stain you quietly. They hope that others will do their bidding for them, spreading their distortions like a virus. But the thing about gossip is that it always carries the scent of the speaker. Over time, people recognize the voice behind the echo, and once that happens, the gossipers begin to lose their audience, because no one admires cowardice in disguise. Real power doesn't talk, it builds. It commands respect through presence, not manipulation. But gossipers don't want real power, they want easy power. They want to influence without responsibility. That's why they don't come to you directly. Because coming to you would require ownership, it would require clarity, it would require standing in the fire of truth, and they don't have the spine for that. So instead, they retreat to their corners, forming alliances based not on loyalty, but on shared bitterness. They create circles of whispers, hoping that if they say something enough times, it becomes real. But repetition never turns a lie into truth. It just exposes desperation. And what's most telling is that the ones who gossip are often the same ones who fail to defend their own lives. They don't stand up for anything except the stories they create about others. They are quick to criticize your decisions, but slow to take any for themselves. That's because gossip is a substitute for direction. It fills the void left by a life that lacks purpose. They distract themselves from their own stagnation by obsessing over your progression. They find comfort in reducing you because it helps them cope with the gap between your evolution and their paralysis. Understand that these people speak from a place of pain masked as superiority. They act like they know better, but they never do better, and that's the dividing line. People who have control don't waste time trying to control the narrative of others. They are too busy leading their own. Power doesn't whisper behind closed doors. It walks boldly into rooms unbothered by the noise. And if someone's only tool is gossip, it means they've already admitted they cannot affect you any other way. The people who gossip the most are often the ones who are quietly drowning in the bitterness of their own unrealized potential. Envy doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in the form of concern, sarcasm, or subtle criticism. But if you listen closely, you'll hear the pain behind the words, the aching frustration of someone who knows, deep down, they could have done more, been more, if only they'd chosen discipline over distraction, effort over excuses. When you succeed, you force them to confront a mirror they've been avoiding for years, and in that mirror they don't see you. They see the version of themselves that never came to life. That's why your progress doesn't inspire them, it agitates them. Because every step you take forward reminds them they stood still. This is the psychology of envy. It disguises itself as opinion, but it originates in regret. It's a silent confession, a non-verbal scream of "I could have done that too if I had tried." But instead of trying, they watched. And now they talk, not because you've wronged them, but because you've revealed something uncomfortable. You've become living proof that the obstacles they blame for their failure weren't really obstacles at all. You've shattered their illusion that life is unfair, because if you, with all your flaws, pain and setbacks, can rise, what does that say about their inaction? It says the problem wasn't life, it was them. And that is a truth too bitter for the fragile ego to swallow. So, instead of swallowing it, they spit venom. They talk about how you changed, how you got lucky, how you must have cheated the system. Not because it's true, but because it's safer than admitting that they betrayed their own gifts. You remind them of their laziness, their wasted time, their broken promises to themselves. They don't hate you for winning. They hate themselves for losing before they ever tried. And so, the easiest way to deal with this internal pain is to project it outward onto the person who triggers it. That's you. You didn't ask for it. But when you rise, you become a target, simply because you expose what others worked hard to hide. Bitterness has a language, and gossip is its grammar. It finds its way into conversations dressed as concern. I just think they're not really who they pretend to be. They'll say, or something about them feels off. What they really mean is, I see them doing what I should have done, and it burns. They can't process that someone else's boldness is highlighting their fear. And so, they turn to character assassination because they can't compete with results. That's the emotional economy of envy. When someone's success makes your failure feel more real, your brain finds a way to defend itself. That defense mechanism becomes gossip. It's psychological warfare on themselves first, and then on you. They won't admit it, but they study you. They notice every detail. Your steps, your habits, your circles. They won't congratulate you openly, but they observe. Not because they admire you, but because they're calculating how to minimize your light. Every word they spread is a coping mechanism to protect themselves from feeling less than. That's what gossip is. It's not an attack. It's a cry for help covered in a mask of superiority. It's a desperate attempt to rewrite their story by staining yours. Their envy becomes especially venomous when they see you doing what they once dreamed of. Maybe they had the same idea, the same goal, the same ambition, but where they hesitated, you acted, and every achievement you unlock reminds them of a dream they quietly buried. That resentment builds over time, turning admiration into animosity. The line between I wish I was them and I hope they fail becomes razor thin, so they take aim with words, hoping that if they throw enough doubt, they can cloud your light. But what they don't realize is that envy cannot kill excellence. It only exposes the lack of it in those who envy. It's important to see that envy doesn't come from people behind you. It comes from those who think they should be beside you, but aren't. And the truth is, they could have been. They had the talent, the ideas, the opportunity, but they made different choices. And now, instead of accepting the consequence of those choices, they choose resentment. They choose to believe the game was rigged, that you had it easier, that you cheated. Not because it's factual, but because that narrative is less painful than saying, I gave up. That's why gossip is never random, it's targeted, strategic. It goes after those who are becoming what others were too afraid to chase. So don't take it personally. Take it as confirmation. You've become a mirror too bright for some people to face. You've become their reminder, and instead of rising with you, they try to drag you into the hole they dug for themselves. But don't go, don't explain yourself, don't tone down your light. You owe no one comfort at the expense of your calling. Let them choke on the bitterness of their silence while you speak fluently in action, in impact, in growth. Because gossip never comes from above. It always comes from below. The moment someone realizes they can never become what you are becoming, they begin to resent your existence. Not because you did something wrong, but because your progress is a reminder that they are stuck. That resentment quickly transforms into sabotage, And when they can't stop your rise with their own actions, they try to stain your name. They want to destroy what they can't become. It's not about you. It's about the reflection of themselves they see in you, the version of them that had dreams, drive, and direction, but lost it somewhere between fear and apathy. And now, rather than owning their failure, they aim their frustration at you. Gossip becomes their way of pulling you back to where they quit. If they can't reach your level, they try to shrink you to theirs. This is why the most vicious gossip often comes not from strangers, but from those who once stood next to you. Maybe they started with the same vision, the same potential, but when you kept going and they stopped, a gap opened. That gap turned into resentment. You didn't leave them behind. They left themselves behind. But they don't want to admit that, so they rewrite the story. You changed, you became arrogant, you got lucky, you sold out. That false narrative becomes their shield against self-accountability. And with that shield in place, they begin their attack. Not with direct conflict, that would take courage, but with whispers, with stories told behind your back, stories laced with jealousy disguised as insight. They hope others will believe them. They want to poison your reputation because they can't kill your momentum. They don't care if it's true, they only care if it sticks. They aren't fighting for truth. They're fighting for control. Because if they can't be you, they want to control how others see you. That's the real intention behind their gossip, to influence perception when they've lost all influence over reality, and it works. Sometimes, people love drama more than truth. They'd rather hear a lie with flair than a truth without noise. But in time, reality always rises. The truth always finds its place. And those who try to destroy others out of bitterness often end up consumed by their own fire. When you grow, when you evolve, you become a threat to those who remain stagnant. They don't just envy your success. They fear what your success says about their own life. Your progress becomes a mirror they can't escape. And so, their instinct isn't to reflect. It's to break the mirror. They believe that if they distort your image, they can feel less distorted themselves. That's why gossip is never about facts. It's about control through distortion. They want others to see you through a dirty lens so they can justify why they never followed their own path. They hope that if they dim your light, theirs will shine again, but shadows don't exist without light. And when your light keeps growing, their shadows deepen. These people aren't interested in building themselves. They're obsessed with tearing others down. That's their form of validation. It's easier to attack than to admit that they gave up. Destruction becomes their mission, not out of strategy, but out of pain. They destroy to distract, and that's why they gossip. It gives them a sense of movement, of purpose. It makes them feel alive for a moment, but it's a false high. Because when the gossip fades, when the room quiets, they're still stuck with the same unfulfilled life. And deep down, they know it. That's why the gossip never stops. It becomes an addiction, a temporary relief from the weight of their own wasted time. The tragedy is, many of them had potential. They could have made it. They had the skills, the ideas, the chances, but they let fear whisper louder than their dreams, and now they watch others live out the life they once imagined. That kind of pain turns poisonous, and instead of using it to grow, they use it to attack. They can't stand watching you build what they were too scared to start, so they begin to chip away at your name, your work, your intentions, hoping that if enough people believe their version of you, they can bury the truth of who you are. But they always forget one thing: character doesn't need defending. Time reveals everything, and when their stories fall apart, your consistency will still be standing. What makes gossipers so dangerous is not just their bitterness, it's their manipulation. They don't speak loudly, they speak strategically. They know how to frame a sentence, how to add just enough doubt, how to disguise envy as honesty. I'm just concerned. I'm just telling the truth. No, they're just trying to cut you with a dull blade. Slowly, passively, behind the scenes. It's not courage, it's strategy from weakness, and people who gossip this way aren't just talking. They're trying to build coalitions. Misery loves company, and gossip is how it recruits. But remember this, the louder someone talks about others, the more silent they are about their own life. You'll never find gossipers talking about their growth, their process, their journey, because they've abandoned it. They talk because they can't create. They judge because they can't build. They watch from the sidelines because stepping into the arena would mean exposing their weaknesses, and that's a kind of pain they're not prepared to face. The gossipers stay in the shadows because light demands accountability. It's easy to mock the architect when you've never built a single wall. It's easy to criticize the warrior when you've never picked up a sword. But true strength lies not in words. It lies in action, in focus, in the silent war against one's own mediocrity. While they scatter their energy into rumors and petty narratives, the disciplined channel theirs into legacy, and that's the difference. One group survives on noise, the other carves its name in silence. Discipline is a lonely path. It doesn't gather crowds the way gossip does. There are no applause breaks for the one who wakes up at dawn to work on their craft. No likes or comments for the years spent refining skill behind closed doors. That's why most people abandon it. It requires too much of you and gives too little instant gratification in return. But that's exactly where real power is born. In the consistency, in the stillness, in the relentless repetition of doing what needs to be done long after the feeling has left. And it is this very discipline that silences the gossip not through confrontation, but through undeniable transformation, because nothing enraged a gossip more than someone who becomes everything they said you couldn't be. And here's what truly unsettles them. You don't just succeed, you do it quietly. You don't need their approval, you don't need the crowd, that kind of self. Containment threatens them deeply because it reminds them that while they depend on attention, you depend on progress. While they chase relevance through conversation, you earn relevance through execution. Your stillness becomes louder than their noise, and when people see you thriving without clapping back, without engaging, without even acknowledging the drama, the gossiper's influence begins to fade. That's the hidden terror in your discipline. It exposes their desperation. They wish they had your level of control, not just control over your craft, but over your emotions. The way you don't respond, the way you remain focused, the way you rise without needing to be seen, it haunts them. Because it means you are led by purpose, not impulse. That kind of internal mastery is foreign to them. Their lives are ruled by distractions, reactions, the highs and lows of being emotionally driven. But you've trained yourself to be emotionally still, mentally clear, spiritually firm. And when someone who's scattered sees someone whole, it creates a kind of psychological discomfort that often turns into hate. Not because you've hurt them, but because your presence reminds them how far they've drifted from their own discipline. Understand this deeply. The ones who gossip the most are also the ones who lack the internal compass to guide their own lives. And without direction, gossip becomes their substitute for momentum. It feels like movement, like participation, but it's empty, because while they talk, you're training, while they guess, you're learning. While they scheme, you're executing, and over time the gap becomes too wide to ignore. They start where you started, but they stay there. You keep moving, you stay uncomfortable, you chase mastery. And that quiet pursuit, that invisible war you fight every day with your own distractions, with your own doubts, that is what separates you, not talent, not luck, discipline. That's why the disciplined are dangerous. Because they don't just win, they outlast. They don't need to clap back. They just keep climbing. They don't chase followers. They build foundations. Their victories are not accidental. They are built on mornings no one saw, sacrifices no one praised, choices no one understood. And when the time comes, when the spotlight hits, when the world finally sees the outcome, they realize that you were never chasing attention. You were chasing mastery, and you were willing to be misunderstood, underestimated, and even mocked for it. Let them talk. Let them mock your silence, your routine, your obsession with details, because eventually the result will speak in a language so clear it won't need translation. Their words will fade. Yours will be carved into structure, impact, and legacy. They'll try to rewrite your story with rumors, but your work will be the ink that makes the truth permanent. Gossip dies where discipline begins. It burns out in the presence of focused fire, and those who try to define you with lies will be forced to watch you define yourself with results. So don't waste a second proving them wrong. Don't get distracted by the noise. Don't let their confusion interrupt your clarity. The greatest revenge is not just success, it's peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you never let their bitterness shape your character. You stayed the course. You chose growth. You chose integrity. You chose the path that asked the most of you and gave the deepest rewards. While they traded their time for entertainment, you traded yours for evolution. That is the ultimate separation. Not noise, not validation, not attention, but the quiet confidence of someone who built everything from nothing and did it without needing applause.